What is the future of CSS? Presumably the global pandemic will lead to some sort of Planet of the Apes scenario, but those guys will write really good CSS. And if you look at current trends, you could sort of try and make some guesses about what things are progressing and what things people are likely going to be focusing more on and how things are going to change in the years to come. Obviously, when you say the future, you could be talking about 1 year, 10 years, and the further you go, the more wrong you're going to be. But these are my general thoughts. The three things to look at really are the state of browsers, the Houdini APIs, and CSS-in-JS. With regards to browsers, what we've generally seen is more and more are kind of consolidating around the same base. So Edge became a Chromium-based WebKit, whatever the correct term is, browser, meaning there's a great deal less diversity between the browsers. And while that's kind of a bad thing for various reasons, it kind of does mean that features will not need as many quirks to work in different browsers, and features won't need to slowly be released in different browsers, and people worrying about browser compatibility. Generally, it should be quicker for things to be rolled out across all browsers because they're going to share a lot of common base engines. The other aspect to focus on is, as well as interesting browser APIs opening up, there are interesting new media queries. The big one recently being kind of the dark mode, light mode setting you can read and then work off of. But there are things to do with accessibility, or things which might help you to do with temperature gauge or light settings, or things to help you with VR, AR settings in a browser. You can imagine that certainly as we move beyond just phones and tablets into more internet-linked devices, more interesting media queries are going to give people more opportunities to do interesting things with CSS selectors and media queries. With regards to Houdini, which is the set of open APIs within browsers that are going to let developers directly change CSS properties about how they load and render, and about how we set our own custom CSS settings. Obviously, that's going to give a great deal more capacity of control for developers. It means that rather than developers constantly agonizing about features they wish they could see in CSS, people will have the ability to go away and prototype those. It means that if there's a feature that lots of people want, someone could probably build a kind of working version, lots of people can adopt it, and it'd be that much quicker for it to end up becoming a native feature within CSS. Ultimately, if you take the example of a jQuery or a Sass or something, someone ultimately wants that to not exist, in that they want it to become a native feature and it gets removed as a side library. And hopefully that Houdini work will begin to allow people to explore ideas and come back with some fresh things which end up becoming integrated into CSS. The other side effect of that, hopefully, is that people start focusing more on CSS rendering. People don't think about CSS performance that often, certainly not on that side of the paint APIs or the layout APIs and the weight that puts on a page. Hopefully that shifts some of the developer focus about performance of CSS and what's the most optimal way of getting something to render and paint in a page, and any reflow effort that's involved. The other one really is about CSS-in-JS, which is currently still a bit of a debate. It's still an acceptable thing to hate it and not enjoy it, either because of the performance reasons or they feel it kind of undoes some of the basic conventions of CSS. Industry trend suggests it's going to become a bigger thing and ultimately probably become the conventional way of doing things. Firstly, there's this focus on componentized logic and scoping your CSS, but also the big paradigm shift towards design systems rather than just style guides. The idea of having these component libraries and very focused sets of rules which are completely isolated and reusable, but also an interaction between the elements having states and themes and needing some way of interacting with the JavaScript. If you couple that together with things like native web components, which are going to need to bake in CSS and JavaScript, I can really only see that trend going further and further towards the JavaScript end in years to come, and sort of ultimately becoming merged somewhat between the two. But then that's amongst hundreds of other things which will happen or won't happen, or things I'm completely missing. Let's see what happens. I would be interested. Let me know. Do a comment or let me know what you think would happen in the future. But it's an exciting time for CSS anyway, with so many different avenues and projects going on. That's your lot today. Ta-ra!